want to know what you're fighting for. Podcast for George. 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 Oh, yeah.
Well, hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. And thank you, as always, to Bernie and Sloan there, the podcast by George singers, backed by popular demand. People love that. I got to admit, I really like it too. Folks, and I'm going to like the show today. We've got a big show coming up on a very important topic, and it's becoming, I don't know, seems like more important all the time. And it is the incidence of cancer and all angles of it. And we've got our friend, our buddy, Dr. Andrew Nish coming on the show. I just wanted to start off with this one thing because I source this on the show all the time. I want people to take a look at this because this just cleared the transom before I came on, actually. And, I talk about climate war and healthcare and the threat to all of us. Well, this is from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, a moment of historic danger. It is still 90 seconds to midnight. We've had that on a lot. That's what it was the past year. Well, it hasn't improved any. Hasn't gotten a lot worse. But then again, when you look at 90 seconds to midnight, maybe it can't get any worse. Ominous trends continue to point the world toward global catastrophe. The war in Ukraine and the widespread and growing reliance on nuclear weapons increase the risk of nuclear escalation, which is what they're all about. This group, by the way, was founded or co-founded by Albert Einstein. So I always encourage people to give it a look. I always thought Einstein was a pretty smart guy. How about you? China, Russia, and the United States are all spending huge sums to expand or modernize their nuclear arsenals, adding to the highlighting is mine, the ever-present danger of nuclear war through mistake or miscalculation. You've heard me talk about the 2020 world that we live in. 20 minutes, we could be annihilated because of a nuclear strike on purpose or by accident. In 2023, Earth experienced its hottest year on record. Did you notice? Massive floods, wildfires, and other climate-related disasters affected millions of people around the world. Meanwhile, rapid and worrisome developments in the life sciences and other disruptive technologies accelerated while governments made only feeble efforts, highlighting is mine. They say feeble efforts to control them. And I would certainly concur about that. So here's the last slide. Today, we once again set the doomsday clock at 90 seconds to midnight, says the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, because humanity continues to face an unprecedented level of danger. Now, they're not talking about you or me or a country or a territory. They're talking about humanity. Our decision should not be taken as a sign that the international security situation has eased. Yeah, because it didn't get any lower. Instead, leaders and citizens around the world should take this statement as a stark warning and respond urgently, as if today were the most dangerous moment in modern history. Because it may well be. And that nuclear thing is a big deal in the Middle East right now. I remind everybody that Israel's got the bomb. We gave it to them. Pakistan's got the bomb. I think they got it from us. And everything could go sideways real quick. But that's not what we're going to be talking about today, folks. We're going to be talking about, as I mentioned, climate, war, and healthcare, with an emphasis today on healthcare. I hope you saw the promo. Why are so many getting cancer? It seems like it. There's a lot of news coverage on it. It's kind of how you look at it. And we're going to be looking at it today with our guest. And it is Dr. Andrew Nish. He spent 3 decades or more as an interventional radiologist. His passion to educate the public and healthcare workers about true health and well-being and how this can be achieved through lifestyle changes, including food and nutrition, stress management, sleep, exercise, purpose in life, and social relationships. He's especially fascinated with mind-body connection and how our thoughts and beliefs directly influence our physical and mental health. And we always get that towards the end of the show, but I don't know, we might get him on here and ask him a question even this morning right off the top. Doc, I put that stuff on there about the atomic scientists, and people would look at that and they'd say, well, what the hell can I do? I mean, it's fait accompli. But your point is, because of the mind-body connection and these things that you've investigated and researched and we talk about on the show, there is something people can do. Each and every one of us can do something to improve ourselves and everybody else.
The collective consciousness.
Yes.
We're all interconnected, George. We've talked about this. Our consciousness, our interconnectedness with each other on this earth and with everything on this earth. If we all just took a deep breath and really meditated, prayed, whatever words you want to use, on harmony and peace and love in the world, it can really happen. And it's been shown in experiments. You can take a large group of people or a small group of people, and you can literally change how the world reacts. There was a study done a number of years ago, and they took a couple thousand people, and they all meditated on peace and love and harmony. And what they found is, over the subsequent few weeks, the number of terrorist attacks decreased, the number of murders decreased. Is that a direct correlation? We don't know, but it's fascinating to think about it.
Yeah, and I want to get this up on screen right away because I tell people, I really encourage people to make comments and pose questions, and I'll pose the questions directly to our guests. The reason for that is, I don't know much about a lot of things. I can use all the help I can get, but I also want to encourage people to view the show and to weigh in. Now, Doc, this is something I know that you've heard before. I hear it, and this is from a hockey buddy of mine, Mason. He wants to know, he says, I've been told by social media, nearly every single thing gives you cancer. How do you respond to that criticism? Every single thing gives you cancer.
Let's talk about how cancer develops, because people want to know, well, I see this in patients I see every day. What caused my cancer? My answer is, there is no one specific thing that caused your cancer. There's a concept called the exposome. And the exposome is all the environmental things we're exposed to from the day we are born till the day we die. And it's that conglomeration of environmental exposures that leads to either wellness or disease. And when I say exposures, that's anything from food to environmental chemicals, but it also includes social relationships, toxicities in relationships, stress, angst, resilience, and all these different exposures over time. So cancer is not a single factor disease. Okay, it's multifactorial. And you have to have multiple factors that come together in a unique way in order to stimulate abnormal growth of cells in cancer. So it's not, oh, you ate too many cheese puffs, that's why you got cancer. No. We have to really look at the multifactorial aspect. When I see a patient, I literally ask them to tell me about their lives from the day they were born. Because what I'm looking for, what traumatic experiences did you have in your life? Because we know traumatic experiences lead to later disease in life. And you combine those traumatic experiences with other environmental exposures. Maybe it's exposure to a poor food system. Maybe it's exposure to chemicals. Maybe it's exposure to lots of stress in your life, either because of relationships or because of insecurities of housing or food. So it's not a single thing. Not everything in our environment causes cancer. Okay. So we've really got to look at it pragmatically. And, that's when I practice integrative medicine. That integrative means, how do we take all of these lifestyle factors and improve them to give you the best possible chance to have a very long, fruitful, profitable life?
That's great. It's a great way to open the show. And I like to emphasize, I tell people every word means something, and integrative, that's what it's all about. Okay, let's get going here with this is why I reached out to the doc the most recent time. Anyway, this got a lot of coverage in a lot of places. This is from USA Today. More than 2 million Americans will get cancer this year. Here's what you should know. Again, this was in the USA Today. This highlighting is mine. Although U.S. cancer cases will eclipse 2 million for the first time this year, there is some good news. What? There's some good news. Lower smoking rates, earlier detection, and improved treatments have lowered death rates over the past 3 decades. A new report said the American Cancer Society's annual cancer statistics report projects 611,720, and that's pretty accurate sounding, cancer deaths this year, a slight increase from a year ago. The cancer death rate dropped 33% from 91 through 2021, according to the most recent statistics available, the group said. Officials said people are increasingly being diagnosed in middle age, younger than when diagnosis happened a generation ago, and they are likelier to survive longer. But experts said there are worrisome signs because of Americans' alarming obesity rate and the rising rate of colorectal cancer among young adults. Okay, Doc, then there's some more to this, and we'll get into it. But I wanted to ask you a question here based on what was earlier said in there, because it occurred to me, survivability of cancer is increasing, and that's the good news. But I kind of look at that and say, well, yeah, nobody wants to die, obviously, but nobody necessarily wants to live with cancer or even a cancer diagnosis. I mean, it depends on the cancer, of course, but sometimes living with a cancer isn't a great bargain. Agree or not?
Yeah. So, let's go back to that a little bit, and let's look at more people are getting cancer, more people are dying year over year, but the death rate. So let's define that. That's the number of deaths per 100,000 population has improved over the last 30 years. Much of that is driven by our improvement in tobacco use. Okay, so we're seeing less tobacco-related cancers. The flip side of that is we're seeing more obesity and metabolic dysregulation associated cancers. And I think that really talks directly to our food system and our society in general. We're not as active. We live under tremendous amounts of perceived stress, and all of those are contributing to this rising rates of incidence of cancer. The other thing is, I want people to understand that over 2/3 of people actually survive their cancer. So, the first thing you tell them they have cancer, and the first thing they think is, oh, I'm going to die. The reality is over 2/3 of people live. Living with cancer can be a normal life where your cancer is cured and you don't really need any ongoing treatment. It can be chronic treatment for literally decades. So in many cases, let's use breast cancer as an example. We've taken it from the potential fatal disease to a chronically managed disease. So we have more medications to target cancer cells at many different levels of how cancer cells divide. And we can switch medicines over time, and we can really treat this as a chronic disease, but there is a cost to all that. So the cost would be, there's a financial cost. These medications are expensive. There's an emotional cost, the worry about, oh, is my cancer going to come back? That is a tremendous emotional toll on people. And then there's really the cost of how do you feel as you go through all of these treatments? Any of these treatments have side effects. Some people have more, some people have less, but there's always, that aspect of it as well.
Now, talk just briefly about that cancer-free or remission thing, because this is a big part of it with a lot of people. I mean, they can get cured, so to speak, or can they? I mean, if you've had cancer, is it always subject to coming back, or are there some cancers that simply can't and won't ever come back?
Well, so that's a debate you can have. Will they never come back? So let's say a woman had breast cancer 30 years ago, and now she has another breast cancer. Is that breast cancer that came back, or is that a second different cancer? Many times it's a second different cancer. So the cure rate, yes, we can cure cancer, okay? So if you have a cancer at a very early stage, meaning it's confined to the organ of origin and has not spread anywhere else, it's very superficial within that organ, meaning it's not deep and invaded the musculature or the outside of the organ, let's say colon or something, that is a curable cancer, meaning if I take out a stage 1 cancer, let's say breast or let's say colon, there's a 95% chance or greater that you are cured, meaning that cancer will never come back in your lifetime. So the longer a cancer goes, though, and the more it grows, and the more it moves into the lymph nodes and the other organs, then cure becomes less likely. And we talk about remission, or we talk about management.
All right, now I want to encourage everybody, and we still have viewers that are joining this show. I pose these questions and make these comments, particularly the questions, because where else are you going to get a chance to ask a question of a cancer expert like Dr. Nish? And if you're facing this, if you're confronting with it, if you've got a friend or a relative or somebody that is, please join us with your questions. Okay, let me see here.
The other thing is, George, remember cancer. We talk about cancer as a singular. Cancer is cancer. Cancer is literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different diseases. And what applied to your grandma may not apply at all to you. And the other dynamic that's going on in cancer treatment is the dynamics of sort of the shifting way we're treating cancer. So, 20 years ago, everything was about what we call cytotoxic chemotherapy, kind of the scorched earth approach. We're going to give you medicine that's going to kill the cancer cells, but it's also going to cause problems with all of your other cells. Mm-hmm. We now have much better targeted therapy, so we can much more precisely target the cancer cells and leave the other normal cells alone. Not perfect, okay, but much better than it used to be.
Well, and that gets to the heart of surgery, which is also part of this. Because back in the day, there were people that were so fearful that they would say, wherever the cancer is, just cut it out of me. I mean, just gut me, basically, get it out of there, and I'll survive that way. But that isn't good thinking now. That isn't necessary with a lot of these cancers, correct?
Well, surgery still plays a significant role in many, many cancers. So if you have a colon cancer, for example, you take part of the colon out. If you have a breast cancer, you take the breast tumor out or do mastectomy. If you have a liver cancer, for example, the first line therapy may be surgical therapy. So surgery still plays a very prominent role in cancer care. But what we've really developed over time is, number one, better surgical techniques. So we're doing smaller surgeries, we're doing more minimally invasive surgeries, and then many times we're following those up with chemotherapy for a number of months afterwards.
All right, let me get this article up on screen once more. There might have been something else here in a couple of paragraphs that I wanted to have in here. The report said rates are increasing for 6 of the 10 most common cancers: breast, prostate, melanoma, kidney, pancreas, and uterine. Lung, colorectal, and pancreas cancers cause the most deaths. More than 125,000 Americans will die of lung cancer in 2024. I've got some information here on lung cancer coming up. Nearly 2.5 times as many deaths as are projected from colon cancer. Cigarette smoking will cause more than 101,000 lung cancer deaths, and another 3,500 projected deaths will be linked to secondhand smoke. Now, as you mentioned, Doc, we've made great strides. We've come a long way from deaths due to cigarette smoking back when I was a kid, for instance. But these cigarettes are still, I mean, they don't call them coffin nails for nothing, right?
Yeah, so, look at those deaths. A decade or two ago, we were above 200,000 deaths for lung cancer. So we've made significant improvements in tobacco cessation policy, getting people off of cigarettes. We peaked back in the 60s, early 70s at around 47% of people smoked. We're now down, I think nationally, we're at about 12 to 12.5%, a little bit slightly higher in Iowa. But, you have to remember also that tobacco-related cancers aren't just lung cancer. Okay. Bladder cancer, significant association with tobacco, pancreas cancer associated, esophagus, head and neck cancers, all associated with tobacco. So there's many other tobacco-related cancers. The other thing that's not in that article that I want to point out, particularly in Iowa, is radon-associated cancers. So cancers associated with this radioactive substance called radon. Radon is a natural breakdown product of uranium. It's a gas, it's odorless, it's colorless, and Iowa has the highest rate of radon in the entire country. It's estimated that 75% of households, if you tested for radon, would be above the EPA limit. So we want to point out radon is a significant cause of lung cancer, maybe up to 10 to 12,000 deaths per year.
All right, let's take a look at this lung cancer information that I have here. This might new repeat. Yeah, this is now we're going to bring it on home here. We're going to talk about Iowa. New report reveals Iowa is 12th worst in the nation for lung cancer causes. The 2023 State of Lung Cancer report. Now, this is from the American Lung Association. It reveals Iowa ranks as the 12th worst in the country for new lung cancer cases. The state saw 6,061.14 new cases per 61. That's
60,
math.
61.14 cases per 100,000 people.
Okay. And the national average of 54.6 new cases per 100,000. It's like, what? I thought we were clean livers here. Clean livers. I thought we lived cleanly here in the state of Iowa. The report found that Iowa ranked, we'll go through these numbers very quickly. Doc, you can jump in on any of these. 37 out of 48 in the nation for rate of new lung cancer cases.
That's the statistic you just gave.
Yeah. 28 or out of 28 out of 42 in the nation for survival.
It's actually 26.
26. Yeah, you can see these a little better than I can. Let me bring it up full screen here so I can read it a little better. Okay. 38 out of 47 in the nation for early diagnosis at 24.8%. Nationally, only 26.6% of cases are diagnosed at an early stage when the survival rate is much higher. What about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting statistic because you're going to go to another page that'll show that we're actually 11th best in lung cancer screening. So I didn't know that statistic. It surprises me a bit, but this is one of the sort of take-home messages. The earlier we diagnose a cancer, for example, the better the prognosis. And that's where lung cancer screening comes in. So people who are at high risk, people who are 50 or over, have 20-pack year smoking histories, meaning they've smoked a pack of cigarettes for 20 years or they've smoked 2 packs for 10 years. And if they've quit within 15 years or continue to smoke, are eligible. Here's the problem. Nationwide, only about 5.5 to 6% of people are actually getting screened. So, you know, it is important. The downside of screening is we will detect cancers that we'll treat. Okay, we're not going to detect cancer and not treat it for the most part. And that cancer may never have influenced someone's life. It's called overdiagnosis. So there's a balancing act with screening.
I mean, is that a big issue? I haven't heard much of it.
Yeah, it is a big issue.
It's
been a big issue in the literature because, you know, every time we screen someone, if there's an abnormality, there's some follow-up test that we're going to do. It might just be an imaging test. It might be a CT in 6 months. It might be a biopsy that can lead to complications. But one of the biggest impacts is the anxiety associated with every test a person has. Oh, is it cancer? Well, now I got to wait 6 months to find out. So there's both the physiologic component of screening. There's also the psychological component of screening.
Yeah, and the psychology here, the stress, the mental part of this is a big part of what we're talking about here. All right, so let me get this back up on screen here and see if I can get through the rest of this here. 11 out of 51 in the nation for lung cancer screenings at 7.1. That's what you were talking about.
Yeah, we're a little better than average.
Yeah, yep. 36 out of 47 in the nation for surgery at 17.6%. Lung cancer can often be treated with surgery if it is diagnosed at an early stage and has not spread. Nationally, 20.8% of cases underwent surgery. Well, I don't know. You could look at that kind of both ways, right, or not?
Well, I think what it reflects is we're diagnosing cancers later in this state than others by that other last statistic you said. And when later stage cancers are diagnosed, many times they wouldn't be operable, meaning they wouldn't be candidates for surgery.
And then the last one here, 15 out of 47 in the nation for lack of treatment at 18.2%. Nationally, 20.6% of cases receive no treatment. And I look at that and I think, okay, this might be an income demographic. This might have to do with just almost geographic access to cancer treatments. How do you analyze that stat?
Yeah, I think it has to do with, do you have insurance or don't you? Obviously, people who are socioeconomically depressed have less access to health care. And I think it probably reflects that. In Iowa, we just know rural areas don't have as good of access to health care as our urban areas. And so I think that's a big, right now for the Iowa Cancer Consortium, which is a group that really looks at cancer in Iowa and develops projects to improve cancer care in Iowa. What we're really looking at now is the rural disparity in cancer care.
Oh, yeah.
How do we get our rural neighbors better care? Because you can't have a radiation machine in every small town. How do we get them better access to cancer care? That is a big top of list project for the Iowa Cancer Consortium.
I want to digress here just a little bit. Again, when I was younger, Doc, I used to think about people living in urban areas because of air pollution and all the toxins in the urban areas and stuff like that. They were more at risk, and you really had to focus on that. We talk about these rural areas, but not only is access an issue here, but exposure is a big issue in rural areas too. They're being exposed to cancer-causing agents in the air, water, and soil in the rural areas big time.
Yeah, I think, again, multifactorial. So what's different about our rural areas than our urban areas? Number one, maybe chemical exposure because of all the farm chemicals. Number two, food access. Really hard to believe, right? Rural areas, farmers, but we're not growing food. We're growing gasoline for our cars, and we're growing soybeans to feed animals, corn and soybeans to feed animals. The other part of the rural, and I talked to Mary Charlton at the University of Iowa about this, is we go to our rural communities, and these towns that were once vibrant farming communities are just drying up. The storefronts are boarded up. Nobody's living there. There's no vibrancy to the communities. And I really think that loneliness and isolation is a significant factor in development of disease. And so what's going on in our rural communities? They're lonely. They just don't have the vibrant community that they used to. So again, lots of different factors, but I think food supply is one of them. I go, if you ride on RAGBRAI, you go through all these small towns. There's no food in these small towns. They're dependent on convenience stores. And I will tell you, there is no food in a convenience store. There's food-like substances made in factories, but there is no food. Maybe you're lucky to find a banana or an orange. I don't know. But I think that's a big problem, because where are these people able to access whole foods? Big problem, food deserts.
Yeah, in rural areas, in the bread basket, so to speak. How ironic. Food-like substances. Yeah, I always like that whenever I hear that. Now, I want to bring this up because this is a big issue with you, and I know that this person is near and dear to your heart, and this program is this Gail Orcutt School Radon Safety Act. Talk about this a little bit.
So yeah, Gail was a woman who developed lung cancer, never smoked a cigarette in her life. Determined that it was radon induced, had high levels of radon in her home. And that really stimulated her to understand the risk associated with high radon levels in buildings, public and private. And she worked for years with the legislature to craft legislation so that all schools had to be tested for radon. Because what tissues are most sensitive in people? Well, the younger you are, the faster your tissues are growing and the more sensitive they are. So now you have kids spending 6-8 hours in school. So yes, we're testing radon. I think personally that before you have a real estate transaction, all houses should be mandated that they be tested. And then if the radon levels are high, undergo radon mitigation, which is a pretty easy task, costs around $1,200. But that's Gail, and she was relentless, and she actually died before the bill was passed. Yeah.
And radon, it's been studied and researched somewhat, but we still don't know how pervasive and how deadly radon is, or do we?
Well, do we know everything about anything, I suppose, but we do know that Iowa has the highest radon levels in the country. We think that about 75% of homes, if tested, would be high for radon. We do know that radon is a direct cause for lung cancer. I think that, it's still being studied. The epidemiology is still being studied. The physiology and science is still being studied. But that's where we are right now.
And I don't know, is this accurate or not, but I'd heard that the reason Iowa has such a high radon rate might be due to the fact just like the earth and the crust of the earth and the moving of glaciers and the grinding of substratus and all this kind of stuff. Is that why? I mean, why does Iowa rank number one in radon?
I guess I don't know the geology of radon. All I know is that, it's a breakdown product of uranium. So we have uranium in our soil. And that's why we have radon. It escapes as a gas. The geology, honestly, I don't know.
I actually took a geology course in college and I do real well on it, so I'm not going to give an opinion on it. Here's something else that you may not want to give an opinion on. This is because this gets into politics and stuff. What do you, Matt? He's a regular viewer of the show. Good guy. He says, "What do you see as the differences between Medicare Advantage programs as opposed to a supplemental insurance for medical?" I mean, do you have an official opinion on that, Doc? Or I don't want to put you on the spot
because
here.
You know what? I am not an insurance. In fact, I turned 65 in 2 months, and I'm going through the exact same fact-finding mission of traditional Medicare with gap plans versus Medicare Advantage. And so I am in the process of learning, and I'm not an expert. So I don't have the expertise to answer that question.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe Matt's going through that. I went through it, but there's no point in me telling you what I did because
everybody's unique. And so, what I'm learning is it depends on your health. Okay. One of the things about Medicare Advantage plans that I do know is that, there's going to be a network of doctors. And when you go out of network, you're out of network. So there's many, many factors that factor into, do I do traditional Medicare with Part A and B, and then Part D and a gap coverage? Do I do Advantage? And that is so individual and so personalized based on your health history and based on your income and all this stuff. So,
yeah. Okay, folks. Again, we're talking to the expert, Dr. Andrew Nish, on the show. And just like Matt there, weigh in with your comments, ask your questions. I'll try to get them on the show. But let's dig deep here. Let's go into something that's very graphic here. And I tell people all the time, I'm kind of a point and shoot graphic kind of guy. This is from the Iowa Cancer Registry that I may have mentioned earlier. Risk factors for cancer. Iowa has the second highest incidence rate for cancer in the United States, behind Kentucky. And I know for the cancer folks like yourself, Doc, did that surprise you when you saw that we're second behind Kentucky? And Kentucky, I think of big tobacco,
Yeah, Kentucky's tobacco driven. They still have a smoking rate of, I think, around 26%. So there's no question Kentucky's tobacco driven. When I look at our state and I really look at, okay, we smoke a little more than average. We have a little bit higher obesity rate than average. We have a tremendous drinking problem in this state.
Oh,
We're the second or third highest in binge drinking. So we have a tremendous alcohol problem. We're not a very active state. So you look at states with low cancer rates. Utah, California has a lower rate. Colorado, they move more. Now, is movement associated with cancer risk? Yeah, it is actually. So I guess when you analyze all the different potential risk factors, it doesn't shock me. We're a farm state, so we're using lots and lots of chemicals, glyphosate being the biggest one. We're the second biggest user of glyphosate in the country behind Illinois. Our waterways are polluted, so we have lots of nitrates in our water. Environmental Working Group did a paper a number of years ago looking at nitrate-associated cancers, and they estimated anywhere from 6,000 to 12,000 cancers associated with nitrates in our drinking water. I think that multifactorial-wise, we're not in a good position. This report was put together. Mary Charlton at the University of Iowa puts this report together. Lots of discussion at the Iowa Cancer Consortium. Why? And again, multiple factors. What can we do as a state to improve our cancer rates? I think working on the obesity epidemic, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. working on our environmental toxins. We should really be focusing on how do we clean up our waterways? How do we grow food without massive amounts of chemical inputs? I think we need to look at our rural communities. I think social isolation, loneliness, anxiety, depression, these all lead to increased rates of cancer. And that's part of the multifactorial part of cancer exposure.
You know, when it comes to the topic today, I would encourage listen to what the doc says. Don't necessarily listen to what I say. And I've got kind of a McBoob way of looking at this, doc. See if you think there's anything to this at all. But I look at the sedentary thing, and when people start to not move, when you're not moving, when you're not thinking outwardly, when you're not out in the world, so to speak, the mind. You talk about this mind-body connection. Kind of views this as, hell, you're dying, or you're on your way, or you're shutting down. You know, let's throw some circuits here. Let's shut some stuff down because you've run the race. It's over with. And so we're beset with these cancers. Is that just crazy talk, or am I?
No, there's nothing crazy about it. You know, I always talk to patients about the use it or lose it phenomenon. So our brain works. We grow and nurture pathways by what we do in our life. So if you don't move a muscle group, if you sit sedentary, you literally lose neural connections to those muscles. The beauty and the good news is you can always redevelop them. So if we don't use our brains to learn new things, maybe you want to learn a new language, maybe you want to do crossword puzzles, whatever it is, it's use it or lose it. And we're discovering that movement, and I don't want to use the word exercise because that puts a lot of people off, but movement in daily life activities counts as exercise. So if you're out mowing the lawn, that's movement. If you're doing the dishes and cooking meals, that's movement. If you're out gardening, pulling weeds, shoveling, that's movement. These are all things that are really important for our health, and particularly in colorectal cancer. So, we look at these startling statistics of younger and younger age groups seeing more and more colorectal cancer. What we know epidemiologically by studying populations is that the more movement and exercise you get, the lower your risk of colon cancer. Now, many, many other factors, that's only one. But yes, movement is really important. And one of the things that, we've always talked about aerobic movement or exercise, walking, cycling, swimming. But what we're also learning is keeping our muscles strong is also important over time. One of the best predictors of early mortality is muscle loss.
Yeah, and I've got a graph coming up here or shortly that we'll get to that talks about doing some strength training and the benefits of that. I want to mention this anyway because this is kind of the weird way that I look at things, folks. But Doc knows I'm a hockey guy. Well, I interviewed a pro hockey player one time that was recovering from I'm talking about a severe concussion, and he said, George. He said, it's really weird. He says, while he was trying to recover, he was on a downtown street and there was a bus going by and something was kind of niggling at his thinking that he ought to step out in front of that bus. And is that connected to the concussion? I thought to myself, well, if you have a concussion, that's as near to death as you can get probably. I mean, you're being knocked unconscious. I mean, systems are shutting down. That's what a very severe concussion is. Does the brain, again, going back to what I talked about earlier and what Doc talks about with his mind-body connection, is it perceiving that the switch has been flipped, that it's shutdown time, that it's time to check out? And was that what this guy was experiencing post-concussion syndrome? But
I have no idea. I have no idea what is.
Isn't that weird though? Yeah.
But we have to, the brain is the most complex organ and thing that we know. Okay, the complexity is overwhelming. We barely understand it, to be honest. And so, what is a concussion doing? Why are neural pathways sort of short-circuiting, being rerouted, making illogical decisions? These are all things that we just don't really understand, frankly.
Yeah, let me, because I want to get to these. These are the biggies here. These are the things that Doc I know really wants to talk about. He mentioned obesity. This is from the Iowa Cancer Registry. Studies show that obesity, often defined as having a body mass index greater than 30 kilograms per, what is that, Doc? I couldn't even tell you. 30 kg.
Kilograms per meter squared.
Oh, okay. Is linked to a higher risk of postmenopausal breast, colorectal, endometrial, esophageal, kidney, and pancreatic cancer. Since weight itself is generally not a good marker of health, it is more important to focus on having a nutritious diet and being physically active. And this is where Iowa ranks, according to the United States, in this BMI of 30 plus, obesity. God, and I think these stats are even increasing.
They
as
are.
we speak.
We're up around 43% now.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, I think this is really, really important because we've always linked obesity with cancer risk. And there are many other cancers actually that are linked with obesity besides the ones that are put up there. But what we're discovering, George, is it's not necessarily the obesity, it's the underlying dysregulation of our metabolic system. So let me define that very, very precisely. What I define as, metabolic health is our ability to take food and convert it to energy. So every cell in our body needs glucose or some form of molecule to convert to energy. ATP is the energy currency. So we convert our food molecules into ATP, and it's ATP that allows our cells to live and perform all the tasks that cells perform. What's happened in our country, what's happened with a Western lifestyle of highly processed, carbohydrate-heavy, sugar-heavy foods is it's been telling our brain and our body that we should be storing energy and not burning it. And that has to do with sort of the master regulator of metabolic processes, insulin. Everybody's heard of insulin, and everybody thinks insulin is the hormone that takes glucose, sugar in our blood, and moves it into our cells. And that's true. But insulin is also telling our body to store energy. So when we have high insulin levels, which 88% of our people in this country probably do, that insulin is moving, and it's called energy partitioning. It's moving energy from burning it to storing it in the form of fat. So if you look at people who are obese, 80% of those are insulin resistant and metabolically abnormal, meaning they have a hard time converting food to energy and they all want to store it. But if you look at people overweight, that's a BMI between 25 and 30, about half of those people are insulin resistant to insulin and are getting the signal to store and not burn. If we look at the normal weight population, so 25 BMI of less than 25, 30% of those people are metabolically abnormal. They just haven't gained the weight yet. Yet their body, their hormones, their insulin levels are telling them you need to store more energy and not burn it. And so that's the really disturbing thing is, and this was shown very, very nicely a number of years ago in a breast cancer paper. They looked at women who were normal weight, metabolically abnormal, meaning they were resistant to the effects of insulin, and their risk of breast cancer was just as high as an obese woman. So we're missing an entire group of people at risk for cancer, and we should really be doing a better job doing metabolic testing, looking at fasting insulin levels, fasting glucose levels, hemoglobin A1C, which tells us our glucose, average glucose over a 4-month period. We should be looking at lipids, triglycerides, and things, because these are not obesity-driven cancers. These are metabolically driven cancers.
All right, we're going to lose the doc here fairly shortly because we're coming up on the top of the hour. I wanted to get through some of these other things. This is not only the amount of food that you eat, but the quality of foods. The foods that you eat on a regular basis make up your diet and may increase or decrease risk for cancer. While the studies are complex and oftentimes are conflicting, research shows that a diet filled with a variety of vegetables, fruit, whole grains, beans, and other plant foods helps lower risk for many cancers. Look at this, Doc. God, consumes 2+ fruits and 3+ vegetables daily. 2021, 7%. Iowa's dead even with the United States, but 7% of us do this.
Yeah, if you really look at the cancer literature, the consumption of fruits and vegetables does not dramatically decrease your risk of cancer. What it does, though, and I think we need to, we're really haven't sorted this out completely. I think when we eat fruits and vegetables and we eat things with lots of fiber, okay, we naturally become less insulin resistant, and our insulin works better to tell us to burn energy and not store it. So, is it really the fruits and vegetables, or is it the fact that they have fiber, and we could take any plant that has fiber and it would be beneficial for cancer risk reduction? So it really is about the plants, and it's about the diversity of plants. And I think we miss that. Let's eat, if you just eat corn and beans and peas, that's a vastly different group of vegetables than if we eat 20 different vegetables. So what we're learning, George, is it's really about the diversity of our plant diet. And so I challenge my patients to eat 30 different plants a day, and they look at me like, you're out of your mind. And I say, no, let's define plants: fruits, vegetables, nuts, okay, wide variety of nuts, incredible health benefits, seeds, pumpkin seed, sesame seed, chia seed, hemp seed, sesame seed, lots of seeds out there that are incredibly healthy. Herbs, okay, use herbs in cooking. Every herb has different properties. Spices are all plant-derived things. Whole grains, not a big, don't like lots of consumption of grains for multiple reasons. Legumes, so lentils, beans, peas are a legume, peanuts are a legume. So it really is about consuming as many plants a day as you possibly can.
I've got questions coming in here. I want to get this on for the doc. Now, this we're talking about news, and this made big news. I remember seeing this. Desert Mantis, a regular viewer of the show, says, recent news: 240,000 detectable plastic fragments found in bottled water per liter. What are the implications for potential cancers? So what's the research on plastics and cancer, Doc?
I don't know that I've seen any research directly on microplastics and cancer. There is, we're concerned a lot about these forever chemicals and Teflon and
PFAS,
things. Yeah. My advice to people is, number one, do not drink out of plastic bottles. Okay. Never heat your water in plastic, because that really exposes us to more of the chemicals in plastic. This whole bottled water thing drives me berserk, because there is absolutely no reason we need to be drinking bottled water. It's been shown, the Environmental Working Group has shown that many, many times bottled water is no more pure than water that comes out of your tap. And it's an environmental disaster throwing these bottles away. And if you think that those bottles are being recycled, think again. Less than 10% of plastic is actually recycled. So we want to store our food in either glass or stainless steel containers and not plastic. We want to heat our food. Please don't heat your food in plastic. Heat your food in glass. And, buy yourself a nice stainless steel water bottle and refill that with tap water, filtered water, or whatever you want to refill it with. But we've got to get out of this bottled water cycle. And I honestly, again, the microplastic, I don't know any research correlating that with cancer risk.
All right, great. We got a boogie here because we're going to run out of time again coming up on the top of the hour. This physical activity thing we talked about earlier, this is Iowa now. Studies show that people who are physically active have a lower risk of certain cancers than those who are not. Physical activity may be particularly to protect against postmenopausal breast cancer and endometrial cancer. Iowa, 20%. The United States, 23%. I saw one time, Doc, the highest rate of obesity and the least physically active people were in Houston, Texas. And it's because they didn't have sidewalks, even because of the heat and humidity down there. And people weren't getting out and they weren't moving around, and they've got an issue with it down there. It looks like we've got an issue along with the rest of the country right here in the Heartland.
Yeah. And, I kind of, there was if you're out in the field laboring all day, or you're digging ditches all day, you're pretty physically active.
Yeah.
And you might not show up on this. You might show up, oh, well, no, I don't run for 5 hours a day or whatever week. So I think that we've really got to redefine activity as movement. And
Yes.
how are you using your body to move? And these are great for epidemiologic studies because they're binary, right? You exercised 150 minutes or you didn't. But we also have to take into account what people are doing as part of their work. Now, many of us sit in chairs in the office all day, and what we're discovering and developing more and more science is that sitting is deadly.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can go
smoking,
out. You can go out and exercise 150 minutes a week, but if you sit the other 95% of the time, that's deadly. So we got to get people out of their chairs. Every hour, I tell my patients, every hour you got to get up, take 5 minutes, walk, do wall sits, do push-ups, squats, I don't care, whatever, but you got to move. You can't sit in chairs for hours on end because that increases the risk of obesity, it increases the risk of cardiovascular disease, it increases the risk of diabetes, and it increases the risk of death.
And people in huge metropolitan areas, think New York City, they have to walk quite a bit distances to get to and from work. And that's a good thing, just having to walk instead of driving right up front,
right.
throwing open the
door.
door.
We need more walkable communities. We need more rideable, cyclable communities. I mean, we just have to develop better urban planning to get people out and moving.
I wanted to ask you about this too, the bottom part of this graphic, Doc. It says adults who met physical activity guidelines of 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous aerobic activity and 2 days of muscle strengthening per week. Now, again, how you get that is another thing. But Doc, what about the fact, and I myself kind of fall into this trap as I reach my advanced age. Well, I used to do a lot more. And so let's say I used to lift weights every day. I don't so much anymore. Not talking about me, but do you get any long-term, or when you stop, the benefit of those types of things are over with?
So, we begin to lose muscle mass after age 30. It slowly declines and certainly accelerates as we move 65 and older. So, we think of strength training as having to go to the gym and lift massive weights.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that way. You can do body weight strength training, push-ups, squats, things like that. You can use light dumbbells. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to remember our neural system. If we don't use a muscle, it's not stimulated, we lose the neural connection. And you have to, the only thing that causes a muscle contraction is a nerve impulse from your brain telling you to contract that muscle. So what we're really trying to do is preserve those neural pathways and preserve that ability to use the muscle. It's important that we at least maintain, and it becomes harder to build strength as you age. And so it really is about consistency and not, I'm going to lift weights for 1 week and then not for the next 6 weeks. I think everything we talk about here is about consistency over time. So if you can develop a routine where maybe 1 or 2 days a week you do some leg exercises, and there's all kinds of videos and everything else online, and maybe 1 or 2 days a week you do some upper body. So you can't just say, well, I'm going to just do squats. Well, what about your pecs and what about your deltoids? We really want people to use multiple muscle groups, particularly large muscle groups. The other benefit of exercise is not just the aerobic capacity helping your heart and things like that, but muscle is a great sink for glucose, so blood sugar. So it helps us attenuate these big spikes in glucose we get after meals. So I always recommend to my patients, after you eat, don't go sit on the couch and watch Netflix. Go out for a 15 or 20-minute walk. Because when you walk, you're using these big muscle groups. They need glucose to function. And the more muscle you have, the more glucose they suck up.
Yeah, and here's something that we got to hit on here before we run out of time. These cancer incidences we talked about, and Doc's well aware of this, are particularly alarming when it comes to the younger population. And is
Mhm.
that because of exactly what you're talking about, Doc? And I see this all the time when I'm out and about. Used to be younger people, before we got cars, we were out on the streets, we were moving around, we were outside. Now, even when they get cars, they're not even out driving around. It seems to me like they're gaming, they're indoors. I don't know. It's not fair to say that they're in their parents' basements, but is that related to the increasing incidence of cancers in younger people?
So there's lots of debate about this. Okay. It's, again, not cut and dry, multiple exposures. So what's happening in our society? When I was in medical school 40 years ago, you never saw a child with type 2 diabetes. And that's the type of diabetes that we see 95% of the time in older people. That's the type of diabetes that's associated with not absolute insulin deficiency, meaning we don't make insulin, but we actually have too much, but it doesn't work right. Now we're seeing more and more type 2 diabetes in younger and younger people. So instead of that diabetes exposure being starting at age 50 or 60, it's now starting in the teens and 20s. Well, that's metabolic dysregulation. They can't use insulin appropriately. They have too much of it. So now we've got this exposure for 20 or 30 years beginning in the teens as opposed to the 50s, and we're seeing cancers earlier. I think that's one aspect. Another aspect is, we don't move as much as, we used to as teens. I remember, my wife and I were talking the other day. I'd go out at 8 o'clock in the morning in the summer and I wouldn't come back till the sun set. And we were out playing and basketball and sports and playing tag or whatever we played. Don't see that anymore. There is, more organized sports activities, but not as many just, go out and play. There's more environmental exposures than there ever used to be, whether it's farm chemicals, whether it's stuff in our food system, whether it's stuff in our, cosmetics and things, we're exposed to more environmental toxins. I think another big one is social media has exposed us to much more hate, and it's created a significant amount of anxiety and stress in our younger people. Anxiety for teenagers is at all-time high. Well, when you're anxious, your body is perceiving a threat to your life, and you are now in fight or flight. Right. Fight or flight is a risk factor for disease. And so we have these exposures that are happening earlier in life. Those exposures are more dramatic than they used to be. And that's why I think we're seeing cancers at younger and younger ages.
All right, and we are out of time. Doc, I do a lot of shows. I do a lot of podcasts. Folks, Dr. Nish has his own show as well. There's nobody that can wrap up a show better than you. We got a couple of minutes left here. I want you to close us out here. Take it away and close out this issue of this edition of Podcast by George.
Boy. This is a real phenomenon. We are seeing more cancer. And if you look at the statistics, probably 50 to 70% of cancers are preventable. So, top tips. How do you prevent cancer? Number one, never smoke. And if you do smoke, stop. Okay. Tobacco is still an enormous issue driving many, many cancers. Number two, we've got to improve our metabolic health in this country. And how do we do that? 80%, I think, is getting rid of highly ultra-processed foods, cookies, crackers, cakes, pastas, breads, pastries, all those things. And we've got to go back to a whole foods, natural diet, eating foods that Mother Nature provides us as close to the whole, as close to nature as possible. So inherently, the food that we grow on this earth is not bad for us. It's what's been done to the food that's bad for us. So we got to stay in the produce section of the grocery store, and we got to stay out of the aisles of the grocery store. Number three, just move. Go out and have fun. You don't have to buy a gym membership. You don't have to buy elaborate equipment. All you got to have is a pair of shoes and go outside and walk, and do it consistently. Enjoy nature. And number four is, I think we really have to be cognizant of what's going on in our environment, because we all know about climate change, whether you believe it or not. We all know that what we're doing from a carbon dioxide standpoint, from how we raise food, is detrimental to our earth. So it's not only detrimental to our earth, it's detrimental to human health. This all interconnects, okay? Just like the collective consciousness, we should not be shocked that human health is getting worse when earth health is getting worse. We're all interconnected. So that's my take home. But be optimistic, because with the right mindset, with the right inputs, we can lead long, healthy lives.
Yeah. And if for no other reason, as I mentioned earlier, tell the brain you want to live, man. That's what it's all about, as far as I'm concerned. And you don't want to do these things. You don't want to get up. You don't want to go outside. Well, there's going to come a day when you're going to wish that you had. I mean, it's all connected. It is the mind-body connection. Doc, that's just great stuff. We'll circle back again. I love having you on the show. I wish you well. Happy New Year here for 2024, and we'll talk again very soon.
Thanks, George. Nice to be here, and great to hopefully change people's lives.
God, I hope so. Yeah. And folks, if you like seeing Dr. Andrew Nish, if you like hearing his wisdom and, the way that he's a wordsmith, this guy is. I mean, he's a medical practitioner, but he's a keen observer also. I've always said that doctors, they're keen observers. That's what the medical practice is all about. You got to see, feel, and think, what your patients are going through. And this guy does it. But if you like seeing him on the show, go to podcastbygeorge.com. Now, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube right now, like us, subscribe. You can do that as you're looking at the video live streams, but you can also find the sign up for those on podcastbygeorge.com. And then the audio only versions of this show are found there as well. Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, iTunes, all of those places where podcasts are heard. That's all at podcastbygeorge.com. But that's going to do it, folks. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.